Hello and welcome to the tutorial regarding Blendshapes in Maya 2019. Read in your midterm goblin, the rigged goblin. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to trim down mine as I've had a couple of other bits of geometry. You may not have it on yours. I'm going to be trimming this down to just the two meshes of the body, one for the head, and the head should be on its own. Well, the two meshes should be at least on their own separate layer. I've actually separated out the head into its own separate layer. I suggest you do the same. So with it selected and independent of whether or not you have it in template or reference mode, select it in the outliner and hit Control D twice, or you can come up here and duplicate this way using the pull down menu. With both of these new heads selected, come to the front view and just pop them over, and you're going to have to unlink them first, because even though they are duplicates, if this head has been templated or bound, then it's not going to be free to move around. And you can tell because these gray squares that are up here in the translations, the rotations, and the scaling indicate that it's blocked because there's these little gray squares here. So I'm going to grab all the incarnations of the head and drag using my left mouse button down the length of all the names of all the channels, and then at the very end I'm going to right click, leave that menu up, go down here to, whoops, can't tell because it's off the screen, here we are, unlock selected. When you do that, you can see that the gray squares disappear. You've effectively unlocked it. Again, make sure that this is not bound. If you've already bound it, you can come up to Skin and unbind. So these are free to move. There's no real influence over the head. In fact, let's just make sure by coming into unbind. And there we go. The layer head mesh layer is just the color. The wireframe is the color of this layer, and when I grab the bone hierarchy, it colors in magenta everything that it's controlling. The fact that it did not include the head means that it's not an issue. It's not really controlling it any. So now with the two duplicate heads, you can go into translate mode or hit W, hold down the X key and just pop them over, so that we have them kind of in 3 units away from the body, or however many units you have, to make sure that you've got these nice separate spacing out of the heads. They're all going to be in the same layer, not much of an issue. Double click on each one, and let's name this one Scowl, and let's name the other one Furrow. And those are going to be the expressions for scowling and furrowing. We're going to be doing manipulation of the mesh so that it looks like in one he's furrowing his brow, and in the other he's scowling using his mouth. So we need to manipulate this geometry, but we need to make sure that the geometry has the same vertices as the original shape. I mean, it needs to be exactly the same geometry. Otherwise, Maya won't know where to move vertices if there is a miscount, or if there's inconsistencies between the amount of vertices of the two. Because when we take all these different heads and ask them to be blend shaped together, Maya is basically going to take all of the little CVs that constitute this character's geometry and manipulate them and warp them so that it matches these other faces. So we cannot add any geometry to these faces. We have to keep them exactly the same poly count and pretty much the same model. But what we can do is manipulate these models using something called soft select. Now soft select is going to be better for expressions, because when you come in here and you grab a vertex on a face, well, I have soft select currently on. Let me show you where you access it. Come up here to the select tool and double click it. When you double click it, you'll get the tool settings for selection. Soft select is collapsed here, and I can open it up. it's been enabled. But so for those of you that are kind of wondering, if you start up Maya and someone's left that setting on and you're confused by it, this is what soft select looks like, and by default should be off. Same thing with symmetry. I think I might have left that on when I was going through this tutorial first. Okay. Yes, turn that off. So when you click on a vertex in any geometry, you're only clicking on one point in space. And if I get really close and do an F after picking, say, the corner of a mouth or something like that, the problem is the minute I pull this down, it's only going to pull that point, and you get these weird spikes. So we have one of two options. We have to spend a lot of time just clicking all around this area and pulling it down, then clicking all around the sort of outer ring of that same periphery. So you have this series of concentric circles that you have to grab and sort of manipulate, and that can get incredibly tedious. So soft select in Maya is an option that allows you to grab a singular control vertex, as I've done here, but it then also grabs in a decreasing influence all of these surrounding CVs. So what you have is a much easier way of manipulating geometry so that there is a softness to it rather than a sharp spike. So let me show you what that looks like when you're grabbing some influential corner of, say, the mouth, in the case of this goblin. When I pull it down, every part of the geometry, the surrounding geometry, also softly goes in decreasing influence. So it's softer, and by the time that this hits the eye up here, which I'm concerned about because I don't want this pulling the eye hole down because that'll look really odd. I want it to kind of stop right around here, the bump of the nose, but right here at the eyelet, I want to leave that alone. And so I want to make sure that I've got the right influence, and that the fall off radius here is a slider that you can manipulate. You can see that that is updating as I'm going through. This would be too much because now I've kind of put the influence all the way up over the eye hole, and while the eye geometry itself is kind of a different bit of geometry that's been combined, and Maya remembers this, it still may pull this down a bit, and you don't want the eyes suddenly warping as you go into a different expression. So make sure you have something where it's just influencing the area you want. And I can do this on the other side. For the purposes of the tutorial, I'm just going to do both sides at separately. I'm going to pull this down now. There's a nice sort of softness about it. And there's a believability because the influence here in the middle of the lip we didn't touch. So when you pull this, there is no influence in the middle of the lip. So really the only thing we're pulling down is literally the edges of the mouth and then the surrounding geometry in a very rounded, soft fashion. So for this character here, this furrowed brow character, we can do the same thing. But if you want the other side of the head to automatically be selected as well, so you can do things symmetrically, then, as we did with the mouth a minute ago, you can pull down each corner separately. But you also have another setting in Maya, which is something called symmetry. And it's right under soft selection. If you open this up, it can ask you, well, which direction do you want the plane, the mirror, to be in? And in this case, we would like the objects Z, the left and right, to be sort of the mirror plane that comes out. So everything on the opposite end of the X of this character, in this case the brow, is going to be selected simultaneous to whatever we select here. You can do this also, say, for the mouth and for the brow. So the other thing with soft select is you have this fall off mode, which is surface or volume. Volume is sort of like quite literally a sphere of influence right around the eye. I mean, it takes everything, including the eye. Surface, it sort of respects the separate meshes. And I actually want that in this case because I don't want it to touch the eye, but I do want the highest points of the brow to come down. And right now, these are the highest points of the brow. So I'm going to go into translate mode now, and just kind of bring them down. Now it's affecting the eye hole a bit. I'm not sure we can get away from that, but I can try to maybe draw down the influence just a bit so that we're going a little softer, a little less harsh with the expression. He almost looks sorrowful now. All right, so Angry Goblin, we kind of went through this. I didn't want to mess things up too much, but I think this is basically a good start. You know, the eyes have not really been affected as much as the brow, and that's what we're looking for. At this point, I'm going to turn off soft select, and I'm also going to come down here and turn off symmetry, which there is no on and off toggle button. You simply have to go to off as a selection for the symmetry, and we're sort of back to normal. So we have two heads. One is furrow, that's got that kind of brows down, and the other one is scowl, where I've got both ends of the face, I have both ends of the mouth pulling down. Now, at this point, I think it's fair to say that as a routine, I usually don't do symmetrical sides of the face in a blend. I will actually have one head that is the left side of the mouth being pulled down, and another blend shape that's the right side of the mouth pulled down, because this gives you a greater freedom of expressions. You can have a smirk, you can have someone sort of speaking out of the side of their mouth to someone on the side, whereas if there's symmetry, the mouth will always go down every single time equally, and it gets a little distracting because a lot of our expressions are actually quite asymmetrical. So again, for the purpose of this tutorial, I don't mind doing something fairly evenly like this brow down, but the examples you might want to do in your actual setup for your pipeline would be one section of the mouth down, another section of the mouth down as separate heads to give you a greater degree of mixing and matching to get a greater range of expressions. All right, so now we're ready to make this into a blend shape. The first thing I want to do, actually, in this case, because my blend shapes are sort of set here, I want to put this head onto a new bone system first, and then add these blends as an augmentation. Because if you look at the character, let's just turn the meshes off and the bone systems on, you can see that there is a jawbone, and the jaw, there's no jawbone, there is a jaw. So let's make a jawbone, because I want to rig this character so that they can speak, and I can combine blend shapes, the scowl, and have it separate from this bone system, which will open and close the character's mouth. So to do this, I want to grab the main head and sort of separate it from the others, because I want to take these and make them disappear for now. So I'll simply go in and change their attribute of visibility to off. And then I'm going to go into the side view, come in here on the head, and I want to attach to an existing rig. So this is like production. Now if you're not setting anything up to blend shape alongside a bone system, that's fine. But since this character already responds to bones because it's been rigged up, why not add something here that controls just the open and closing, the hinge of the jaw? So to do that, we come in again to rigging, come up to skeleton, and you can click on create joints. But we're going to click on an existing joint here, and you can see my response to that. Now I'm going to follow sort of visually this line of geometry. That's really where the pivot is. If you think of sort of the pivot of where your jaw is, it's actually kind of up here, but we can get away with a little lack of realism because this is a fantastic character, and our mandibles kind of start here as jaws, go down and across. But to mimic that, you might want to just get something simpler. I'm going to say right about there, and then I'm going to pop that bone right there. So this should, in fact, you can come up to the outliner now, click on the floating title here and press F, because when you click on the title up here of the outliner, instead of actually clicking inside the outliner, it maintains the last thing it has selected, which in this case is the tip of this new jawbone. So if I click on the top of the title here, it keeps that selected, and I'm allowed to press F and actually go to it in the hierarchy chain. So we have set this up complete with constraints. It's very important to make sure that these joints are not underneath the constraints. Now, why is that an issue? It's an issue because if you cut and paste animation onto skeletons, and this is an orient constraint, it will not inherit any animation. But remember that Maya thinks as a specific hierarchy. It doesn't think of things in the terms of names, so it's not going to put the animation of head tip onto head tip. It's simply going to read in this hierarchy of animation and place it on whatever's there. So you want to have these orients at the very end of the chain and have things like these joints right after each other. So we need to actually switch out the placement here in the outliner. So I'm going to grab joint 1, which is the first section we made, and then using my middle mouse button, hold it down. See, it's outlined there. It's letting me know that I'm now moving it. I'm going to be very careful about popping up, not here, because when it is outlining an object, it means it's going to place it as a child underneath that. We do not want that. We want to go right between these two, and you can see that it changes to just a line, which means it's going to place it right there. So now we have joint 1, which we can rename into jaw, and the very end we can rename into jaw tip. So now we have a jaw for our goblin, adding on to an existing rigged character. And this is just fine because it's a very, very simple little joint. In this way, you can also create joints for the eyes. If you want to create an eye control, you want to make sure that the joint for that is right in the center of the sphere of the eyes, because you don't want them rotating out of the skull. But you can also create, say, joints for ears, things like that. So this particular method can be used for several appendages that come in after you've already rigged the character. Again, this character is already rigged. It's already got a constraint system and it's ready to go. We're simply adding something onto it. So now with the head selected, get rid of the outliner and bring it back, and it's collapsed everything magically. Now with this head, we want to put it onto the rig. However, another eccentricity of Maya is that you're not really allowed to reskin something over and over. We've already skinned the body throughout this skeleton here, so really we can only ask Maya to attach this head to selected joints. These are the selected joints, and since it kind of starts here at the nape of the neck, and the body includes the neck coming off from the torso, I don't really care about this joint here. I think I'm going to attach it right there instead, because that's really where everything begins. It's effectively like a sliced off skull. It really doesn't deform save for the jaw. There's not a lot of hinges up here. So you want to grab just the specific skeleton joints that we want to adhere this to, then press Control and go to the head mesh, and under skin go to bind skin and skin. If you were to select all three of these separate joints, you can use selected joint, but in this case we never really rigged anything to head. Now neck down here has part of the body geometry, but head is what we want to do with just this geometry here, as if this is sort of a shorn skull. So go in and grab the topmost parent of this, which is the head joint. Then you can shift select the geometry, and then under bind skin options, joint hierarchy, and only two influences, because really we just want this jaw to move. So if we apply, this should work fine. The weighting will be really off in face. In fact, I expect this character's face to go down, and that looks really suspicious. I would not hire that person. But I do want I do want to weight this later. So through the magic of pausing the video, I've gone in and tried to clean things up a little bit with the skin constraints for this character's jaw, so it's not as horrifying. And we now see that the head is controlled by the jaw. And when we grab the skeleton, it colors the head geometry in magenta, signifying that this is now skinned, and this skeleton now influences the head as well. So how do we combine this with Blendshapes? Well, first of all, bring the heads back in. You can do so through display and show all, bringing everything back into visibility. And you want to grab the two heads that are your deformed heads, and the last one you want to select is, if you're doing it in the modeling window, use the shift button, left click, and if you're doing this in the outliner, you want to grab the two expressions, and then if you want to select the base head last, you hold down the control key. So with that selected, you want to go out of the rigging mode in Maya and go into animation, then go over to deform and pop down to blend shape. Bring up the options for it, because I like to actually give everything a name before I do it. This helps overall clarity for yourself later. So create. And how do we know that this is something that is controlling the head as well? Well, come in here to Windows and go to Animation Editors, and then go almost to the bottom for Shape Editor, and you can see that you have two new shape sliders. So these should work along with the face, but look what happens. It actually goes 100% back to that expression. And we say, well, now wait a minute. It's no longer using the joint's influence. It's still there. The jaw isn't actually moving. See, the bone's not moving. It's just the geometry is going back 100% to that head. We want to do it in tandem with the joint. So Maya has several different influences on this geometry. Now maybe yours is working perfectly, but in this case this one is not, and this is how you debug it. So go to some part of the geometry, make sure the geometry is selected, and click and hold down your right mouse button, and you'll get a list of things for that model, including down here you've got inputs. And if you go to the very bottom where it says, well, let me try to do this so that it shows up actually in the Maya window that I've got here. Move this a little higher. So if you right click on just the model, I'm trying to avoid these constraints and these joints, just the model, right click, hold it down, go to inputs, and then go to all inputs at the bottom. It shows you all the different things that are going on with this head. It's got the blend shapes, it's got the skin clusters as well. So these need reordering, and you can middle mouse button click on any of these things like the skin cluster, and then drag it up, and you can see you could pop it here, and it can actually start, these are all things you got to start trying, like what goes in what order so that it's going to start working for you. Is the blend shape got to go down? Yes, that was it. So skin clusters first, then the blend shape, and that was the magic order for things. Now when I combine these, although again this needs a little kind of tweaking, I can actually combine the furrow and the jaw movement, and Maya now has an order of operations. So it would be fairly trivial for me to put in a NURBS circle and hang it like a nose ring to influence this rotation, and it is rotating in tandem and moving along with the blend shape very nicely. So that's how you set things up to allow yourself the combination of joints as well as blend shapes for your rig.